You've been told morality is your compass, yet you feel lost. You obey every rule, suppress every instinct, and sacrifice your desires in the name of good. Nietzsche saw this and called it slave morality, a code invented by the weak to tame the strong. Under its banner, compassion becomes complacency, humility becomes self-erasure, and guilt becomes a weapon turned inward. Modern morality doesn't elevate you. It asks for obedience over creativity, sacrifice over self, respect, pity over potency. With every "thou shalt not," you trade a piece of your power for the illusion of righteousness. You mistake conformity for virtue and confusion for conscience. Nietzsche warned us that this moral system was never about human flourishing. It was born from resentment, an effort to level greatness by worshiping the meek. It didn't spring from courage, but from fear. Fear of instinct, fear of difference, fear of becoming more than the herd. In the reflections ahead, we'll expose 10 brutal ways morality keeps you weak and how to shatter these invisible chains. Because real strength isn't found by following rules. It's found by creating them, by daring to stand beyond good and evil, and by forging a courage that morality can never grant. You mistake conformity for ethics. Morality, as most understand it, is a checklist, a list of do's and don'ts prescribed by tradition, religion, or society. But Nietzsche saw this reductive approach for what it is, a mirror of the herd, not a reflection of your own soul. You follow the rules because they're there, because everyone else does, because it's the default programming of civilization, and you call it noble. You call it ethical. Yet ethics born of conformity is nothing more than obedience masquerading as virtue. True ethics arise not from following an inherited code, but from creative self-legislation. They are the expressions of your own becoming, forged in the crucible of your values and experiences. When you mistake conformity for ethics, you abdicate your responsibility to think and feel for yourself. You silence the unique tension in your blood that seeks to define your way, not the way handed down to you. Nietzsche warned that when everyone moves in lockstep, individuality dies. The herd moves together, safe in numbers, but sterile in spirit. Ethics, distilled to conformity, produce citizens, not creators. They reward safety, not courage, sameness, not greatness. And so you find yourself trapped in a moral treadmill, always obeying, never questioning, never becoming. To break free, you must stop asking, "What do I have to do?" and start asking, "What should I do?" According to the fire within me, you must reclaim the capacity to say no to any rule that strangles your growth. Because only when you craft your own ethics, rooted in your unique will to power, do you step off the conveyor belt of the herd and onto the path of your own becoming. You worship guilt as virtue. Guilt is a poison sold as medicine. You swallow it to prove your moral fiber, to atone for imagined sins, to keep your own instincts in check. But Nietzsche saw guilt not as a sign of conscience, but as evidence of enslavement, a ritual self-flagellation that elevates weakness into holiness. Worshipping guilt means living in perpetual debt to an invisible creditor, the collective. Every impulse deemed selfish is punished by an internal jury that demands penance. You praise yourself for the pain as if suffering makes you better. Yet guilt corrodes your spirit, turning vitality into self-loathing. True virtue arises not from guilt, but from self-affirmation. It emerges when you act from authenticity, not compulsion. When your actions align with your depth, you feel responsibility, not guilt. You do not apologize for living. You recognize that life itself is a form of art, sometimes messy, sometimes painful, always your own. Nietzsche urged us to overturn the altar of guilt, to transform the debt into investment, investing in your growth, your strength, your self-creation. Only then does morality become a celebration of your potential rather than a sentence for your supposed failures. Let go of guilt as a virtue and embrace responsibility as your guiding light. Slave morality punishes strength. Nietzsche coined the term slave morality to describe the moral code born from the resentment of the weak. It exalts qualities like humility, meekness, and self-denial. Because it cannot endure the idea of the strong, strength becomes dangerous, success becomes suspicious, Ambition becomes a crime, and so the herd crafts a moral system that punishes greatness, elevating the powerless into paragons of virtue. When you internalize slave morality, you learn to hate what gives you power: your confidence, your creativity, your drive. You're praised for stepping back, for staying small, for not threatening the crowd's sense of security. You label strength as arrogance, excellence as vanity, leadership as exploitation. This dynamic keeps you trapped. The moment you flex your will to power, guilt and shame descend. You stifle your potential to maintain acceptance. You settle for mediocrity to avoid the moral backlash. Nietzsche's antidote was a radical re-evaluation of values. Turn against the morality that worships weakness and create a new code that honors strength. Recognize that your power, physical, intellectual, creative, is not a sin, but the very stuff of life's affirmation. Only then can you escape the moral prison of the slave and reclaim your sovereignty. The ascetic ideal enshrines weakness. The ascetic ideal, celebrating poverty of spirit, self-denial, and the renunciation of earthly pleasures, has ruled Western morality for centuries. Nietzsche called this the highest expression of the will to nothingness, the longing to obliterate desire rather than transform it. You fast, you deny, you mortify the flesh, believing this proves your worth. But in reality, you are burying your vitality. The ascetic ideal does not elevate the soul, it negates it. It asks you to refuse life's abundance in the hope of finding purity. Yet purity achieved through denial is death, not transcendence. You shrink your world to avoid temptation, only to find yourself weakened, hollowed, unmoored. Your passions are not demons to exorcise, but energies to channel. Nietzsche championed the opposite. Embrace life's complexity, feast on its joy and sorrow, harness desire instead of damning it. The true alchemy lies in converting base instinct into spiritual gold, not in denying the base. To shatter the ascetic ideal, you must say yes to your own becoming. Permit yourself to experience fully, sensually, intensely, fearlessly. Only in that fullness do you learn mastery, not through negation, but through transformation. Reject the false holiness of self-denial and rediscover the holiness of self-creation. Pity is a mask for powerlessness. Pity is praised as the highest of virtues, an empathetic embrace of another's suffering. Yet Nietzsche saw through its disguise. Pity often masks the pity giver's own powerlessness. When you pity someone, you place yourself above them in the moral hierarchy. You reinforce the divide between the strong and the weak. You assert your own safety by magnifying another's vulnerability. In offering pity, you avoid real engagement. You keep the sufferer at arm's length, safe in your moral superiority. You soothe your conscience without ever sharing the burden. Meanwhile, the one you pity remains stuck in the role of victim, never challenged to harness their own will to power. Pity nurtures dependence and invites resentment, both for the one giving and the one receiving it. True compassion, Nietzsche would argue, is not pity. It is fellowship in becoming. It recognizes suffering as a crucible for growth, not a permanent mark of shame. It doesn't congratulate weakness. It honors the courage to transcend it. Instead of saying, "Poor you," true strength says, "Rise with me." To break free from the pity trap, you must see it for what it is, a comforting lie that absolves you from active participation. Ask yourself, am I pitying to feel strong, or am I empowering through shared struggle? When confronted with suffering, your own or another's, resist the urge to stand back. Step in. Offer challenge rather than consoling words. Encourage action rather than sentimental lament. Only then does your response become a catalyst for power, not a celebration of powerlessness. You internalize others' judgments. Every word of praise and every whisper of critique leaves an imprint on your psyche. Nietzsche warned that when you internalize others' judgments, you become a prisoner of external wills. As you barter your autonomy for social acceptance, you shape your behavior not from a source within, but from the shifting sands of popular opinion. To internalize judgment is to wear invisible shackles. You second-guess your instincts. You silence your boldest ideas. You tailor your thoughts and deeds to avoid disapproval, and in doing so you fragment your identity, morphing into a patchwork of borrowed values. The result is a life half-lived. A perpetual performance for an audience that doesn't even exist outside your mind. True liberation begins the moment you refuse to accept the verdict of the crowd as gospel. You reclaim the capacity to say, "This is my measure, not theirs." You stop asking, "What will they think?" and start asking, "What am I called to become?" You detach your self-worth from applause and condemn it only when it betrays your own standards of integrity. To shatter the habit of internalized judgment, practice radical self-parenting. When a critical voice rises within, trace its origin. Whose values does it echo? Then replace it with your own voice, a voice honed by introspection, courage, and the relentless pursuit of your will to power. The moment you turn inward for approval, you become unstoppable. Moral dogma stifles creativity. Moral dogma thrives on certainty, on absolute rules that leave no room for questioning. Yet creativity demands the opposite, uncertainty. It flourishes in the tension between order and chaos. When you cling to rigid moral codes, you bind your mind to pre-written answers and marginalize the possibility of innovation. Dogma tells you there is one right way to live, think, or create. It spins parables of good and evil that insist on unbending obedience. Under its sway, your imaginative faculties atrophy. You stop exploring new possibilities and retreat into safe, repeatable pattern. The artist's spark dies when every brushstroke must conform to an inherited template. The thinker's insight dulls when every thought must bow to a preordained creed. Nietzsche glorified the free spirit who questions all authorities, including moral ones. He embraced the creative chaos that breaks existing forms to sculpt new ones. He celebrated the dance between destruction and creation, knowing that every act of genuine transformation begins with the rebellion against dogma. To liberate your creativity, first interrogate your moral assumptions. Ask yourself, which rules serve my highest expression? Which ones constrict it? Then be willing to transgress the latter. Grant yourself the permission to err, to fail, and to dismantle your own convictions. Only in that space of radical experimentation will your creative will to power awaken. You fear your instincts as sin instincts are your primal compass, your body's ancient intelligence guiding you toward life and away from danger. Yet, under the thumb of moral tradition, you learn to fear them as sinful. Desire becomes shameful, anger becomes taboo, hunger becomes weakness. You swallow these impulses or veil them in polite euphemisms, believing that discipline equals virtue. Nietzsche saw instinct not as temptation, but as source. Instincts carry the raw energy you need to create, to resist, to affirm your being. To condemn them is to starve the creative will. When you mistrust your instincts, you hand authority over your life to an abstract moral code, one that is indifferent to your unique constitution and destiny. True mastery of yourself does not come from suppressing instincts, but from transforming them. Acknowledge their presence, feel their force, then channel them into creative acts, into art, into work, into love that elevate both you and the world. Integrate anger into boundary setting, integrate fear into vigilant courage. To break free of the fear of sin, practice instinctual literacy. Observe your impulses without guilt. Trace their energy through your body, then choose consciously how to embody them in your values and actions. In that alchemy, instinct becomes ally, not adversary. Fuel for your will to power, not chains around it. You silence your authentic voice. In the marketplace of ideas, the loudest voices often drown out your own. Yet Nietzsche taught that beneath the clamor of convention lies a unique song, your authentic voice, that must be heard. When you silence this voice, you trade your singular destiny for a hollow echo of the multitude. You learn to speak in cliches, to parrot accepted beliefs, to smile when your spirit wishes to roar. The result is a life half-lived, abundant in noise, but bankrupt in meaning. Silencing begins early. You're praised for saying what should be said and punished for what needs to be said. You learn that authenticity risks rejection, so you stake your safety on conformity. An entire repertoire of inner urgings, impulses, intuitions, dreams are labeled imprudent or immodest, and so they retreat. Over time, your interior landscape goes fallow. The well springs dry, and when trauma or crisis demands genuine expression, you find yourself voiceless. Nietzsche's remedy was stark. Become the creator of your own voice, not the consumer of others. Writing, speaking, acting from the primal center of your will to power means exposing yourself to misunderstanding, even hate. But it also means encountering your own depths with brutal honesty. You discover that authenticity is not a polite concession, but a revolutionary act. A declaration that you will not be subsumed by system or sentiment. Reclaiming your voice demands practice. Begin by noticing moments when you withhold what you really think. Feel the tension in your body. Ask yourself, what am I afraid will happen if I speak my truth? Then risking. Say a single sentence you've left unsaid. Feel the tremor in the air. Wear the discomfort like a medal. Each time you choose expression over silence, you regain a shard of your soul. Voice is not mere speech. It is the choreography of thought, feeling, and will in concert. When you forge it, you also forge self-trust. You learn that even if the world rejects your truth, you remain your primary witness. Nietzsche claimed that a life without this fierce self-witness is an unexamined play, a tragedy staged by others. So speak, not to please, not to persuade, but to become. True morality springs from the will to power. Morality has been sold as constraint, a list of injunctions to keep us small. Nietzsche tore away this facade to reveal a more radical source, morality as expression of the will to power. True morality doesn't suppress desire, it refines it. It doesn't demand obedience to external commandments, it demands faithfulness to your own creative essence. In slave morality, you measure yourself against an external ideal. Humility, self-denial, pity, and will to power morality, you measure yourself against an inner ideal, the highest realization of your capacities. Your virtues emerge from what you choose to value: courage, integrity, self, overcoming, rather than what you've been taught to fear. This shift reverses the moral hierarchy. You no longer serve morality. Morality serves your growth. To cultivate this inner morality, begin by asking, what virtues does my highest self require? Let anger become justice, fear become vigilance, desire become creation. Test these virtues in life's crucibles. Notice that authentic morality never punishes the self as much as it challenges the self. It calls you forward, not backward. It doesn't demand suffering for its own sake, but demands that you bear the necessary suffering to achieve greatness. Nietzsche's call to amor fati, love of fate, is itself a moral axiom born from the will to power. It transforms adversity into material for self-crafting. It declares that every event, no matter how brutal, is provision for your becoming. You do not curse the storm. You use it to forge steel within. This is morality's highest purpose, not to protect comfort, but to activate the power within you. When you live by this internal morality, you become unstoppable. Not because you conquer others, but because you conquer the greatest opponent of all, your own doubt. You enact virtues that resonate with your deepest energies. You no longer resent the moral law, you embody it. And in that embodiment, you become the living testament to what morality was always meant to be: the art of affirming the self at the highest pitch of its power.